Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm McLeod. I'm Executive Director for the Eldercare Foundation, and I'll be your MC for this afternoon's celebration and lecture. We acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples, on whose traditional territory both Eldercare and the university stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples, whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. The UVic Institute on Aging and Lifelong Health and the Eldercare Foundation are pleased to present the 2020 Valued Elder Recognition Awards and International Day of Older Persons Lecture, featuring Dave Korzinski, Verena, Menec, and Eddy Elmer. For those of you in our audience who don't already know, the Valued Elder Recognition Awards, or the VERAs, honor individuals who, over their lifetime, have given an exemplary service through volunteerism. For the past 20 years, the Institute and Eldercare have hosted VERA to recognize volunteerism in the Capital Regional District on southern Vancouver Island, and have paired it with a lecture presentation in celebration of United Nations International Day of Older Persons. This year, on the 30th anniversary of International Day of Older Persons, the United Nations theme is Pandemics, Do They Change the Way We Address Age and Aging? We hope our lecture today will provide you with some valuable insights on this topical theme. Now, before we begin, a few housekeeping notes for you watching in the audience. Your audio has been muted and we have set it up so only the presenters and myself will be on video. This event is being recorded and will be posted to both the Institute's and the Eldercare's websites. Our three panelists will each give their presentation and then we will open the Q&A session. You may ask your questions by using the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. Please click the Q&A icon to open the text box and indicate who you would like your questions posed to. And lastly, don't forget to move around and stretch regularly, as we'll be together for a couple of hours. Okay, so now that our housekeeping is out of the way, let's get going. We are delighted to kick off today's event with a tribute to our 11 extraordinary Valued Elder Recognition Award recipients for 2020. Our first VERA Award recipient is Eleanor Arkstein. Eleanor was nominated by Anne Truman, staff lead for the Sendell program at Thrifty Foods in Sydney. Eleanor volunteers at several organizations in Sydney, the Sendell program at Thrifty Foods, the Sydney Historical Museum, the Sydney North Saanich branch of the Vancouver Island Regional Library, and the BC Aviation Museum. She has also volunteered with the St. Vincent de Paul and the Sydney North Saanich RCMP. As a Thrifty Sendell volunteer, Eleanor is very committed and loves what she does. She's personable, a pleasure to work with, and likes to help her fellow volunteers. Eleanor is a great listener, which is so important when making phone calls to customers. Her patience and comforting personality make her indispensable. For the past 15 years, Eleanor has volunteered at the Sydney Historical Museum. Not only has she faithfully supported the museum by coming in one morning a week to work in the collection storage, she's also served several years on their board of directors. Eleanor's dedication and support are greatly valued, and her ideas have helped shape the direction and growth of the museum. Eleanor is an avid reader and library patron who attended her first Friends of the Library meeting at the Sydney North Saanich branch in 2007. She joined the Friends and is now their longest serving member. Eleanor keeps the Friends connected and well-informed, and her positive attitude, her team-minded approach, and her knowledge and experience have helped to ensure the board's sustainability over the years. Eleanor also works tirelessly with her fellow Friends to host the popular annual book sale, which brings book lovers and library supporters together and raises funds to create enhanced library experiences. Eleanor served as secretary on the board of directors at the British Columbia Aviation Museum for 2 four-year terms and lent her support to the board members as they made operational and strategic decisions about the museum. Eleanor is also a member of the planning committee for the museum's open house and is currently the cashier coordinator, a member of the gift shop team, and most recently, with the outbreak of COVID-19, Eleanor lent a hand by feeding and caring for the museum cat until a suitable home was found for him. In her professional life, Eleanor was a legal secretary. As a hardworking and dedicated volunteer, Eleanor brings energy, initiative, and great ideas to everything she does, and is a highly valued volunteer who deserves acknowledgement for her inspiring embracement of volunteerism. Our next recipient is Andre Galbraith. Andre was nominated by Hazel Meredith, CEO at the Mental Health Recovery Partners South Island. In 1984, Andre was a founding member of the BC Schizophrenia Society Victoria branch, now called Mental Health Recovery Partners South Island. Having a family member with a mental health diagnosis, Andre knows firsthand the profound impact it can have on a family. The agency found its start as Andre and several of her family members realized the need for a community-based resource to help families supporting a loved one with schizophrenia. They organized a psychiatrist to give a public presentation at the local library. And they expected a few people to attend. Well, over 100 people came together to learn more about helping their loved one. Andre has remained committed to the organization for over 40 years. She volunteered for several terms on their board of directors, and following her retirement in 1999, Andre became an office and event volunteer, where she would welcome community members, share her personal story, and navigate community resources to help people feel less alone in their journey of mental health, whether as a person with an illness or a family member. In her professional life, Andre worked in schools as a special student assistant. For 9 years between the 1980s and the 1990s, Andre volunteered on the board of directors at Capital Mental Health Association and worked in their gift shop once a week from 1999 until it closed in 2017. People who work with Andre at the Mental Health Recovery Partners speak of her selfless commitment, lovely smile, warmth, compassion, and her wonderful sense of humor. They say her kindness, empathy, and generosity of spirit has made a big difference in the lives of countless individuals over the years. Our next recipient is Mary Gidney. Mary was nominated by Maria Weaver, Volunteer and Community Engagement Coordinator for Island Sexual Health Society. In addition to the Island Sexual Health Society, Mary also volunteers for the Metchosin Arts and Cultural Association, the Metchosin Fire Department and Emergency Operations Center, Metchosin Day, and refugee sponsorship. Mary's stellar volunteer career launched in 2006 when she volunteered to help organize Metchosin Day. Metchosin Day is an annual fair that brings almost 6,000 people for a celebration of rural life. For 14 years, Mary effortlessly organized a plethora of tasks with her team, contributing hundreds of hours to make the day a success. During the 2013 Metchosin Day celebration, Mary was honored with their Citizen of the Year Award. In 2017, Mary and 2 friends began formulating plans to repurpose the Metchosin Elementary School and turn it into an arts center. In September 2012, the Metchosin Art Gallery opened, and over the years, the Art Center has grown and flourished into a lively hub for artists and crafters, encouraging idea exchanges between local students, First Nations, and Metchosinites. As a volunteer with the Metchosin Fire Department and Emergency Operations Center, Mary helped organize volunteers to prepare food for training sessions and meetings. When there was a fire call out, Mary helped to organize food for the firefighters once they returned, or she arranged to have the food sent to the site of the fire. Additionally, she worked with the Emergency Operations Center on their emergency preparedness, ensuring enough food was on hand in case of a major emergency. In 2016, Mary got involved as part of a group of local adults who formed a committee to sponsor a refugee family to relocate to Victoria. In July 2016, the group welcomed a family who had been living in a Sudanese refugee camp for over 20 years. Mom, Dad, and 5 children got off the plane, and in early September, a 6th baby came along. Mary has been the major force in helping the family to adjust to life in Canada. Mary has become like a grandmother to the children and is a trusted friend to the parents. Typically, sponsorship agreements last for 1 year, but Mary's commitment to work with the family has continued. Mary began volunteering with Island Sexual Health in 2019. While her primary volunteer responsibilities have included assisting the physicians, nurses, and patients, Mary takes on additional responsibilities whenever possible. In 2019, she offered her truck for the Victoria Pride Parade. Music blasting, decorated with what looked like over 100 balloons and a brightly costumed team dancing in the truck bed, Mary drove the float, proudly waving and honking. In her professional life, Mary was a high school teacher. As a dedicated volunteer, Mary brings a wealth of knowledge, warmth, empathy, and experience to everything she does. Our next recipient is Sue Ellen Gunther. Sue Ellen was nominated by Barbara Boyle from the Victoria Hospice Society's Bedside Singers Program. In addition to Victoria Hospice, Sue Ellen volunteers for the First Unitarian Church of Victoria and has also lent a hand at the One Up Victoria Single Parent Resource Center. When Sue Ellen retired in 2007, she signed up for bedside singer training at Victoria Hospice. She enjoys singing and is comfortable around people and their families at end of life. In this unique program, pairs of volunteers sing to hospice patients and their families. Sue Ellen believes music opens doors to conversations between loved ones and connects people to their past at a time when they may be reflecting on their lifetime. When the longtime original leader and coordinator of the Bedside Singers needed to step down suddenly for health reasons, Sue Ann did not hesitate to jump in and offer help. A natural leader, Sue Ellen's skills as a teacher, trainer, organizer, and team builder have been invaluable to the continuation of the Hospice Bedside Singers program. Sue Ellen has a long and varied history of volunteering at the First Unitarian Church of Victoria, including teaching in the Sunday school, sitting on the church board, and organizing several major fundraisers, including the annual services auction and book sale. In Sue Ellen's capable hands, both fundraisers have become thriving social and fundraising successes. In 2019, Sue Ellen was bestowed the honor of Church Elder. Sue Ellen was also a key contributor to the church's Refugee Sponsorship Committee, first in raising the money to sponsor the family, then organizing housing for them and building multi-faith connections. When the family's arrival date drew near, Sue Ellen led a team of 12 people who cleaned and repainted the family's rental suite. In addition to being a consummate organizer and motivator of volunteers, Sue Ellen rolled up her sleeves and wielded the rollers and brushes and brooms until the suite was sparkling and ready for occupancy. Sue Ellen also donated her time and expertise volunteering for the Moms and Mentors program at the One Up Victoria Single Family Resource Center. In her professional life, Sue Ellen was the textbook buyer at the UVic bookstore. Sue Ellen's dream has always been to make a difference, and she has accomplished this by being a lifelong learner, volunteer, and teacher. Sue Ellen is the ultimate example of the saying, if you want something done, always go to the busiest person you know. With her quiet, positive energy, patience, and sensitivity, Sue Ellen is that special kind of person who makes a difference by being a vital part of her community. Our next recipient is Margaret Palmer. Margaret, or Marg as she prefers, was nominated by Cherry Miltimore, volunteer coordinator at the Land Conservancy, Abkhazia Garden. In addition to Abkhazia Garden, Marg also volunteers for the Demezi Memorial Abbeyfield Legacy Society, the Oak Bay Heritage Foundation, and the Victoria Horticultural Society. Marg believes communities need places of peace, tranquility, and beauty, and her volunteer activities support her belief. For over 18 years, Marg has been volunteering at Abkhazia Garden. Rain or shine, Marg can be found serenely pulling weeds or welcoming people at the garden gate. On many a rainy, cool day, when enthusiasm for being outside might be waning, Marg rarely misses a shift, arriving on her bicycle in her yellow raincoat. Marg's ability to engage in conversation with visitors from all over the world makes every Thursday afternoon interesting for her fellow volunteers. As one board member noted, she's a lot of fun to be around. Marg's love of gardening led her to become a volunteer gardener at the Kildonan Heritage House in Oak Bay. Operated by the Demezi Memorial Abbeyfield Legacy Society, Kildonan House provides independent living for low-income seniors. Recently, the Society collaborated on 2 nominations for Volunteer Service Awards, one of which has resulted in Abbeyfield Canada's 2020 Lifetime Recognition Award being presented to the Society's longest-serving board member, who is now 102 years young. Colleagues say it is typical of Marg that she would be selflessly involved in recognition for the volunteer work of others when she does so much volunteering herself. At Oak Bay Heritage, Marg serves as a heritage volunteer, inspiring and leading many initiatives and projects. Her experience, knowledge, and willingness to dive in are invaluable to Oak Bay Heritage and to the community. Fellow volunteers say serving with Marg is a pleasure, that her enthusiasm and energy are contagious, and that she has a wonderful sense of humor. In her professional life, Marg was a librarian for both the BC Ministry of Competition, Science and Enterprise and the Ministry of Energy, Mines, and Northern Development. Her tireless contributions, willingness to help others, and determination to see projects through to completion demonstrate that amazing things can be achieved in our retirement years. Our next recipients are Dick and Diane Payne. This dynamic duo was nominated by Eileen Grant, manager at the Oak Bay Emergency Program. When it comes to volunteering, Dick and Diane each bring different skills to the table. As a couple, they are a powerhouse. At the Oak Bay Emergency Program, Dick and Diane were always scheduled separately, but they always showed up together and ended up doing double shifts, illustrating just how much of an inseparable team these two really are. People are not just touched by their actions, they are invigorated by their zest for life and genuine caring for others. During the many hours they give to others, Dick and Diane bring calm and lots of smiles to every situation, task, or encounter. The Paynes have been active members of the Oak Bay Emergency Program for 28 years. Diane has been a member of the Emergency Support Service, the Emergency Preparedness Education, and Amateur Radio Comms teams since she joined the program. Dick has been with the comms team since he joined the organization, and he recently joined their Emergency Support Services team. The Emergency Support Services Program provides referrals to essential services for evacuees during a disaster. The Emergency Preparedness Education team delivers face-to-face emergency preparedness training to the general public, and the comms program trains volunteers to provide ham radio communications during an emergency disaster. Through their selfless dedication, Dick and Diane have made Oak Bay a more disaster-resilient community. As educators, they've been providing Oak Bay residents with the information and direction they need to feel safe, secure, and prepared. In 2005, the Paynes initiated the Oak Bay Block Watch program in their neighborhood by pounding gently on doors, and they got 40 houses enrolled. Diane was the Block Watch captain until 2015, contributing greatly to the success of the program. Between 2009 and 2012, Diane volunteered at the Oak Bay Lodge long-term care home, assisting with yoga and social programs for residents. Their other volunteering activities include the annual Swiftsure International Yacht Race and the Royal Victoria Yacht Club's handicap sailing program. In their professional lives, Diane was a physiotherapist working with seniors at the Juan de Fuca hospitals, and Dick was an engineer with the province of British Columbia. Dick and Diane exemplify what helping neighbors and friends is all about by sharing their skills, knowledge, time, and experience to benefit their community. Our next recipient is Janice Poulin. Janice, or Jan as she most often called, was nominated by Barbara Sawatsky, board member for the Metchosin Community Association. Jan volunteers at several organizations in Metchosin: the Metchosin Community Association, the Metchosin Heritage Committee, the School Museum, the Museum Society, the District of Metchosin Heritage Advisory Select Committee, the Metchosin Arts and Cultural Association, and St. Mary's Church. In the words of her nominator, Barb, there are very few people who live in Metchosin who do not know the colorful, the upbeat swirl of energy, the dynamo named Jan Poulin. When Jan was 5 years old, her parents bought the Metchosin Corner store. Growing up and working at the store, Jan came to know most of the residents of Metchosin and the Beecher Bay First Nation. Jan loved to listen to their stories, and as she learned of the hardships and difficulties many faced, Jan responded with compassion. The long store hours instilled a strong work ethic and a sense of inclusiveness in Jan. Her caring traits are still evident today, as she always takes the time to check in on people who are unwell or having difficulties. While living in Cobble Hill as an adult, Jan volunteered in the Skalium Village Recovery Center. At the age of 34, she enrolled in a University of Victoria Bachelor of Arts program, and she completed the 4-year program in 6 years as she juggled home life and her teacher assistant job at the Discovery School in Shawnigan Lake. In 2007, Jan and her family moved back to Metchosin, and she dove into the local volunteer pool with both feet. Because she loves the community's history, she joined the Heritage Committee and volunteered as a docent at the Metchosin School Museum. With her passion for local history, she is an important information resource for the museum. She sat for 6 years on the Metchosin Museum Board of Directors and served on the Metchosin Arts and Cultural Association Board. The Metchosin Community Association's annual Mighty Garage Sale would not be the success it is without Jan's commitment, her diligence, and willingness to lend a hand to whatever needs to be done. Jan's list of interests and accomplishments is long. Smart, motivated, and artistic, Jan brings laughter, encouragement, and inspiration to everyone around her. Our next recipient is Beverly Unger. Beverly was nominated by Maria Martins, Community Relations Coordinator for the Victoria Symphony. Beverly believes music is food for the soul. She cares deeply about the value of live symphonic music for youth. As a volunteer for the Victoria Symphony, Beverly supports music programs for children in schools. She also supports the Composer in Residence program, where members of the symphony work with high school students to compose music and perform a concert for the public at the end of their project. Her attendance at one of these concerts in 2009 led her to make her first of many contributions to the Victoria Symphony. Colleagues at the Victoria Symphony highlight Beverly's determination, her generosity, and keenness to help local youth have more access to musical education and performance opportunities. She is the greatest supporter of the Victoria Symphony's education and outreach program. At Beverly's urging, the Symphony expanded a special program called Adopt a School that brings many of the Symphony's programs free of charge to schools with marginalized and vulnerable populations. She's also volunteered at Our Place and Victoria Kool-Aid Society, participating in the creation of the community's branch for Planned Parenthood, as well as the Salt Spring Island Community Center and Youth Center. Prior to retirement, Beverly was a social work psychotherapist in New York City. At the James Bay Community Project, Beverly volunteered in her professional capacity, leading workshops for depressed women and acting as a helper to their new mothers group. Colleagues at the Victoria Symphony describe Beverly as invigorating and insightful with an endless amount of energy. Our next recipient is Trudine Wilson. Trudine was nominated by Belinda LeBlanc, Ladies Auxiliary Ways and Means Chair at the Royal Canadian Legion's Prince Edward Branch No. 91 in Langford. In addition to her volunteer work at the Royal Canadian Legion, Trudine is also a celebrated volunteer for the Girl Guides of Canada. A 2014 article in the Goldstream News Gazette distinguished Trudine as proof positive that guiding is for life. As a girl growing up in Colwood, Trudine joined Brownies at the Colwood Children's Hall in 1962 and stayed on as a guide and then a ranger. In 1967, she volunteered as junior leader for the first Colwood Guides, and over 50 years later, she is still running the unit in that same Colwood Hall. Her leadership skills and passion for guiding led her to become the unit's lieutenant and then the captain. Additionally, she has served in numerous district and division leadership positions. Trudine strongly believes in the valuable learning, team building, peer guidance, and social skills guiding provides to our youth. She is always at the ready to take on innovative or unusual tasks. When guiding brought in a new computer system for tracking member information, Trudine joined the IMIS team, even though she had never even used a computer before. She even designated her home as a temporary storehouse where all the local Girl Guide cookies get delivered before distribution to the districts. So think of Trudine next year when you buy your box or more of Girl Guide cookies. Her long-standing dedication to guiding has been recognized with numerous special awards, including honorary life membership. But oh no, Trudine's exemplary volunteer service does not stop there. In 1997, she joined the Royal Canadian Legion, Prince Edward Branch No. 91, where she continues to be a very active member. Trudine has held numerous positions of leadership within the Legion and its Ladies Auxiliary, and keeps the Legion humming. She organizes and runs the 2 annual craft fairs and the annual book sale. And on top of all that, Trudine arranges for birthday cards for all the veterans and residents at Broadmead Lodge, and makes monthly visits to the Ladies Auxiliary's adopted veteran, accompanied by a fellow member and a therapy dog. Trudine thrives being around people of all ages. She is always ready, willing, and able to help others, and she gives countless hours of her time to the community. Hardworking, dedicated volunteers like Trudine allow not-for-profit organizations to keep their doors open. And our final recipient of the 2020 Valued Elder Recognition Awards is Donna Zwires. Donna was nominated by Brenda Lynn, Executive Director for Saanich Volunteer Services Society. Donna has been volunteering with the Saanich Volunteer Services Society for 23 years. Volunteering for at least 2 hours each week, she's completed over 830 jobs for the agency to date. Donna has an infectious smile and is the kind of person who, upon first meeting them, you want to know them more. Her skills, attributes, and loyalty would be welcome in any organization, and staff at Saanich Volunteer Services consider themselves very lucky that she chooses to share her time and skills with them. Donna's caring, good-natured demeanor makes her so easy to talk with. As a companion visitor, a program that matches homebound older adults with a volunteer who visits them weekly, Donna enjoys her time with each client. The clients are so very friendly. I've sat in many kitchens and was privileged to hear their life stories, she says. We keep people in their homes as long as possible. Often, I was the only person they got to talk to that week, thus the long chats in kitchens or on doorsteps. Donna has also served as a volunteer driver, helping the Society's clients stay healthy by taking them to medical appointments. Donna's love of gardening is the extra gift she gives to the Saanich Volunteer Services Society. She lovingly shares her knowledge and passion by looking after the flowers and shrubbery around McRae House, the heritage building that is home to the Society's office. In addition to Saanich Volunteer Services, Donna also volunteers with the Garth Homer Society in Saanich, an organization that supports adults with developmental disabilities to live fulfilling lives. Literacy is very important to Donna. She's been an active volunteer for the Victoria Times Colonist Book Sale for more than 15 years. And from 1986 to 1995, Donna volunteered at numerous school libraries, both here in Victoria and in Newmarket, Ontario. In her professional career, Donna was a computer analyst and mathematician. After becoming a mom, she retired to be at home with her children. According to her nominator, these words by author Roy Bennett best describe Donna. Be the reason somebody smiles. Wow. What a stellar group of amazing, giving individuals. A big, heartfelt thank you to all of our 2020 Vera recipients. Your extraordinary contributions have touched thousands of lives and enhanced the health and well-being of our communities. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the presentation part of our program. But before we get started, I want to remind you, stretch a little, move around periodically, as we won't be taking any formal breaks. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our 3 panelists who will share their expertise on social isolation, loneliness, and their impact on seniors' well-being. Dave Korzinski is the Research Director at the Angus Reid Institute, a nonprofit organization committed to independent research. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science and economics and a master's degree in public policy. He was the lead researcher for A Portrait of Social Isolation and Loneliness in Canada Today, a project conducted in 2019 in partnership with Cardis, an independent think tank. Our second presenter will be Dr. Verena Menec. Dr. Menec is a professor in the Department of Community Health Sciences, Rady College of Medicine at the University of Manitoba. Her research interests include healthy aging, determinants of health aging, social isolation and loneliness, and age-friendly communities as a way to promote healthy aging. She is currently part of a 5-year Pan-Canadian New Horizon project that brings together community-based organizations with the goal of enhancing social isolation of at-risk older adults in Winnipeg. She is also the Manitoba site lead of the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging, the largest study on aging ever conducted in Canada, and the lead author on a recent scholarly publication entitled Examining Social Isolation and Loneliness in relation to social support and psychological distress using Canadian longitudinal study of aging data. Our final presenter today will be Eddy Elmer. Eddy is a gerontology researcher and consultant in aging and mental health, focusing on social isolation and loneliness in marginalized groups. Eddy holds bachelor's degrees in psychology and general studies and a master's degree in gerontology, all from Simon Fraser University. Eddy is completing a PhD in social gerontology from Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, focusing on minority stress and loneliness in older LGBTQ+ adults. Eddy served on the Vancouver Seniors Advisory Committee for 8 years and is now on the City of Vancouver 2S LGBTQ+ Advisory Committee. Eddy is also on the board of directors of the British Columbia Psychogeriatric Association and is vice chair of the Correctional Service of Canada Citizen Advisory Committee for Metro Vancouver West Community Corrections. In 2018, Eddy wrote a report for the City of Vancouver and Vancouver Coastal Health entitled Social Isolation and Loneliness Among Seniors in Vancouver, Strategies for Reduction and Prevention. We have 3 fantastic panelists, and I know you're all so excited to hear their presentations, so I'm now going to throw it over to you, Dave.
Hey, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for tuning in today. I'm really excited to present some of our data from the Angus Reid Institute, and also to learn here, because I think, Verena and Eddy have such a really interesting expertise that I think we'll all benefit from. So my presentation is, we want to dig into a little bit of the numbers and see what is the social isolation and loneliness, who does it really affect in Canada? Because, when we did this project, I was a little bit surprised at some of the numbers that came out. The first thing we want to do, though, is really talk about, so what is it that we're talking about here? So a couple of quick kind of definitional things. What is social isolation, and how does it kind of compare and contrast with loneliness? A lot of people kind of, when they're not really, introduced to these ideas in depth, think that they're kind of the same thing, but they actually differ in very stark ways. Somebody dealing with social isolation could be described as a person with few social contacts, little meaningful interaction, and a lack of mutually rewarding relationships. Isolation differs from loneliness in key ways, though. While isolation can be described through objective behaviors such as actions and contact with others, loneliness is subjective. It's a feeling that your relationships are kind of not what you wish they would be, and you can long for more interaction, or more valuable interaction, more rewarding interaction. I've seen it described as a mismatch between the quantity and quality of social relationships that a person has compared to what it is that they actually want. So I think that's important to keep in mind, because we're going to discuss both of those concepts here as we go along, and just kind of see how they interact with people in Canada. Briefly, just about the study, it was 2,055 people across the country. We did this in last May, and we've actually, we have a little bit of a preview that we just actually reran this study last week, and we want to look at how the pandemic has kind of influenced this. But the numbers that we're going to look at today are primarily in a regular year. We just want to see how people feel when it's not, one of the weirdest times in human history. So we're going to discuss the 2019 study, and that's just an idea that we have for a pretty significant portion of the population from each of these different age groups that were given the survey, and that gave us their responses. So in measuring social isolation, we looked at some things that probably, fairly common concepts for everybody. They're things that we all deal with. How much time are you alone over the course of the last couple of weeks or months? So in a typical month, how often do you interact with people, either in your household, your friends or family members, and very importantly, neighbors and people that are in your close proximate community, because that's a very important thing for people who do feel connected. Oftentimes it's because of it's community organizations, volunteering, these types of initiatives that get people together and actually help to form really rewarding communities. There's other questions in here that are just about broad community connections, how often you participate in neighborhood projects, how often you go out to live events. So you can see already how the post and intra-pandemic numbers are going to be a little bit more staggering, just because it's been so hard to do that for people. So that's just an idea of just how we measured isolation, and we'll get into that more in a second. The other thing that we did is we measured loneliness. So you need different measures for these two concepts. This gets at more of what you want, what you wish for out of your relationships and your friendships. friends and family members. Do you wish that you had somebody to talk to and you often don't? That's a big thing. 41% of Canadians say that they often or sometimes feel that way. And that can be a very difficult and kind of alienating feeling if you just want to reach out and chat with somebody and you don't really have somebody who you can rely on. There's also a feeling of loneliness, wishing that you had more human contact or that you had somebody who could, be a partner to go places with you. 54% of Canadians saying that they wish that they had somebody to go, just out on a weekend trip with sometimes, and they lack that companionship. So again, very kind of common questions that you might not think about every day, but that people have quite a difficult time with across the country. And so in quantifying this, you can see that this is in a typical year. We ask people how often they're doing these types of things. And, 18% of Canadians said that they hadn't seen their friends or family members at all in the past month, when we asked them in a typical year. 37% said just once or twice. I want to draw your attention as well, because I brought it up initially. The percentage of people that don't really interact with their neighbors in a typical year, 45% saying not at all in the month, and another 33% saying just once or twice. That gives you an idea of just how isolated we are in situations where, we have access to people all around us, but we don't necessarily get out there and take advantage of it. And I think there's some organizing principles that can be drawn from that. Particularly for older people, but also for younger people, because this really affects everybody, and stronger communities have such a strong health and wellness benefit, in addition to just making people feel more connected and just more satisfied with their lives. And this is some more data on Canadians interacting in their communities. And, you see people who use local community centers. Only about a quarter of people do that these days. I was born in 1985, and I remember going to a community library when I was younger all the time, but that's not something that I've done in ages now. And these little things that we've kind of moved away from as a society can really be a significant impact on how a person feels connected to their community. So we just wanted to really draw that home, is that there's a significant portion of Canadians all across the country, wherever you are, that really don't have a strong connection with their local community. And what this kind of distills down to, we took all of these behaviors and we scored the variables. If you want to look up how we did that in more detail, I invite you to go to angusreid.org. I believe there's going to be a link provided to this, and also keep an eye out for the new study that's going to look at this data again. But what we see is that about 29% of Canadians are what we describe as very isolated. So they're really not engaging in any of those activities. And they scored highest on that list when we added all those variables up. 22% of Canadians are in, they're still having a difficult time. They're not quite in that 29%, disconnected from everybody type of situation, but are also really kind of an at-risk population for just the spin-off effects that I think we're going to discuss in some of the forthcoming data and research about the impacts of isolation. When we look at this across generations, you really see, I've added up the two variables, so the very isolated and the somewhat isolated. And you can see that men have a little bit more of a difficult time connecting in their communities and with friends and family at times. And for older people, they do have challenges, because we're focusing on that today. There's about half of Canadians over the age of 54 who say that they're quite isolated. So that's a real challenge and something that I think we need to be aware of. But it's also very interesting that this is something that nobody is really free from. So that's also a good point to keep in mind, is everybody has challenges with this, no matter what kind of age and demographic group that you're in. When we look at loneliness, we did the same thing because we wanted to score that as well. And we see fewer people are lonely, but still a significant portion, about 1 in 5. And when we look at that across the age and gender comparison, you really see younger women stand out on that as having a difficult time connecting, feeling that their relationships are valuable, and that they're really getting what they want. So 67% of women in that 18 to 34 age group are, they're lonely, just for lack of a better term, having a very difficult time. You see it drop off a little bit with age, which I think is a very important thing to note, and is kind of a sign that older people are feeling that they have valuable relationships. But I think that's still something that needs to be nurtured and cultivated. And this obviously, when you look at 16 and 14% respectively, you have to extrapolate that out to how many people we have in Canada. That is a ton of people. That's hundreds of thousands of people who are having a very difficult time and feel lonely and feel isolated. Moving forward, you can see by those age brackets that we were looking at, isolation is a challenge for everybody. That 55 to 64 age group just before retirement has quite a challenge. But everybody really faces this issue, and I think we have to keep that in mind when we're trying to kind of optimize our society, is that everybody can benefit from a little bit more connection. It's not something that really discerns by population. It's a big problem for everybody. When we look at loneliness, there is a notable age kind of trend here, much more than we see with isolation. So our community disconnectedness is pretty consistent, but our loneliness really drops off with age. You think about people who are older and are, have grandchildren and really valuable relationships. They tend to kind of voice that they're getting a lot of value and a real rewarding kind of relationship with friends and family members, that oftentimes younger people, when they're kind of just getting into their work life, and they have a hard time building really strong connections. And so we looked at this. This is the first piece of data that I have from the new study. This is just how much more isolated we are in 2020. As I mentioned, this is just last week. A 14-point increase in the group that feels very isolated, a 5-point increase in the somewhat isolated group. So now we're looking at 70% of the population. And this is something that, the health impacts, the long-term impacts of this are going to be very important for public health officials, for community organizers, and for people who want to kind of improve the lives and the communication that Canadians have with each other. We're facing a big challenge right now. The same trend comes with loneliness on this next slide here, not quite as much of a jump. So isolation is really a big kind of spin-off of this pandemic. Loneliness is very high, about 53% feeling that they're lonely this year as compared to last year, where it was at 48. So still a very significant portion of the population. I invite you to actually look at this intersection a little bit more on the website if you would like. I don't have quite enough time to really explore this, but we did look at how loneliness and isolation can kind of exacerbate each other, and the likelihood that if you are very lonely, you also may be very isolated. So these are groups, with the worst off, obviously, in your top left-hand corner there, that are very lonely and very isolated. And we did a little bit of analysis on that, which unfortunately I don't have time for, but I thought was interesting to note, is that those things do appear to have a bit of a correlation. One doesn't necessarily mean the other, but they do kind of go hand in hand at times. And very quickly, I wanted to make a note of, so this is what people said in terms of video messaging apps like Zoom that we're on right now. You could see that people who are not isolated at all are more likely to be adapting to these types of technologies. And this is just last year. That suggests that they're kind of, they're having a little bit more of an encouragement of activity and community organization. And when you look at their responses, for everybody who uses these types of technologies, anybody who does, regardless of where they fit on our spectrum of isolation, find that they're very useful. Even those who are very isolated, 71% of them say that they really like video technology. It's better than nothing. They appreciate it. It makes them feel more connected. So I think that's something to keep in mind, is that we do have some of these technological solutions that are helping. They're not perfect, but there's certainly a benefit. And my final kind of piece of data here is that the usage of these apps is really increasing. I've got one slide here that shows the general population, almost twice as likely to be using them all the time, more often, or sometimes. And if you look at people 55 plus, which is actually, I think, 2 slides ahead, the very last slide, this is people 55 plus adapting to this new technology. You had about 4 in 10 using it previously, and that number is way up to almost 60% now. So people are really adapting to this. And if you consider how positive people view it in terms of their connection, I think that's something to keep in mind, is that these are really helping us. And I think this presentation, this panel is a good reminder that, we have the ability to connect with each other. And thank you all for listening, and I hope you really enjoy the rest of our presenters.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm not sure what's happening. I think my mic is on, but my video, my presentation is out. Okay. I think my video should be starting soon so you can see me. I am very pleased to be here with you today. I'm coming from my home in Winnipeg, so it's great to be virtually in Victoria. I'm going to take Dave's presentation a little further and talk a little bit about the health and well-being impact of social isolation and loneliness. And then also go into starting into looking at some solutions to the issue. So we know a lot about the impacts of social isolation and loneliness. There has been a lot of research done on that topic. We know that it impacts physiological processes. For example, we know that social isolation and loneliness impact the immune system, it decreased your immune system. And I'm just wondering why I'm not showing up on video. Maybe somebody can let me know if I need to do something. So the physiological factors that are impacted by social isolation and loneliness. Social isolation and loneliness also impact health behaviors. So for example, I've given the example of worse sleep quality, but also other behaviors like people tend to be less active, physically active, they may start to smoke. And then we have a lot of information around the, okay, I just hear that I'm on video, I just don't see myself. I'm sorry about that. We have a lot of research that shows then the health and well-being impacts of social isolation and loneliness. For example, increases the risk of heart disease and stroke. We have an increased risk of dementia. We have a major increased risk of depression that's linked to loneliness, poor quality of life. We have increased healthcare use that may not come as a surprise when you look at the impact on health, and then also the increased risk of mortality, and then many, many more factors that are impacted. So it's a major, major health impact. So one group of researchers looked at a whole, over 50 studies that looked at social isolation specifically and mortality. And they concluded that mortality is comparable to other risk factors, well-established risk factors like smoking, like obesity, like lack of exercise, which we kind of all know that they're bad for people's health and that they impact mortality, and social isolation is right up there with that impact. I wanted to just give an example of a study that I did recently with colleagues of mine using the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging. So this is national data, it's national Canadian data. And if we look at those people aged 65 plus, we looked at the relationship between both social isolation and loneliness and psychological distress. Psychological distress refers to a general feeling of both depression and anxiety. And among those who were not lonely, 9% reported being psychologically distressed. So it shows it's not all about social isolation and loneliness. One can be, of course, psychologically distressed for many other reasons. So that's kind of our baseline. However, then when we look at those who were lonely, we see that among those who were lonely, 25% were psychologically distressed. That's a lot of people, a quarter of them. And then when we add in the social isolation, we end up with 30% who reported being psychologically depressed. So it is a big impact on mental health as well as the physical health problem. Now you might say, yeah, but couldn't it be that if you're already depressed, that you also become lonely? And that is our chicken and egg issue. What comes first? Is it the chicken or the egg? And it's in fact both. So we know that social isolation and loneliness actually also predict bad health outcomes, so health problems and mental health problems, but it's also vice versa, as I've shown on the next slide, where we see the reverse happens as well. So people who already have health problems, physical health problem or already mental health problems, also then are more likely to become socially isolated and lonely. So it kind of feeds back on each other. It's this loop. And the reality is even more complex than that. And I've just given an example. I made this up, but I mean, it's based on the literature, even though I can't support all those different relationships. But take the example of a person who has just lost a spouse, a partner, so has become widowed. That's a major life event. That can result in social isolation. And Dave earlier mentioned that men tend to be more isolated, and that is sometimes a problem. You have often older men who have very small social networks, and they may rely on their spouse. So when that spouse dies, they're alone. They're socially isolated. They might become lonely because of that. They also then might not eat as well. They cannot sleep well anymore. As a result, they also are less active and become depressed. We have increase in health problems that might have been there already, and they get even worse. And the loneliness and isolation gets worse. So my point being that all these factors, whether they're, and if you could go back, please, can start to cascade down and start to make the problem worse, or conversely, we can spiral back up if there's interventions in any one of those people, and then people start to get better again physically and emotionally. So another piece of the story then is what makes people socially isolated and lonely. And I gave the example of widowhood being one factor that we know is responsible, but we know, again, there's a lot of research on this topic, and we know quite a lot about what are the factors that lead to social isolation or loneliness. Dave already mentioned age is a contributor to, there's different patterns across age groups. There's gender differences. I just want to make mention here, and this relates to the social groups and demographic factors that I have on my slide. Income. Income is a big factor. Low income is related to social isolation and loneliness, and that kind of makes sense because when people don't have money, it is harder to access services, to participate in activities. For example, it's harder to use technology, as we've seen now during COVID. You need a computer, that costs money. We need internet access, that costs money. So that's low income is one factor as well. Life events and transitions make a difference. My widowhood example is one big life event that has a major impact and can lead to loneliness and social isolation. But also retirement can be another one. Being a caregiver can be very isolating. We have personality or psychological factors that make a difference. So for example, some people have unreasonable, if you will, kind of high expectations about social relationships, and that might impact them. And Eddy will take that a little further in his presentation. Then we have health-related factors, and I alluded to that, that people who have health problems, chronic health problems, maybe mobility problems, can become socially isolated and lonely because they can't get out. And then we have, broadly speaking, environmental factors that can make a difference. For example, lack of access to transportation. If buildings are not accessible, people may not want to be going out. If a neighborhood is not safe, people feel uncomfortable going out to going places, and that can be isolating. And from the perspective of Winnipeg, winter can be a major factor. It can be very isolating when people can't go out. So what then do we do about social isolation and loneliness? Well, I mean, the simple story would be, if social isolation is about not having enough social contact, well, let's just increase social contacts. And if loneliness is about having not feeling happy about the quality of social relationships, well, we just enhance the quality of social relationships. If it were that easy, we would all be really happy and do well. But it's, of course, not that easy. And we need to look towards the reasons why people are socially isolated and lonely. And there are many reasons for that, as I mentioned. So I've just given a few examples here of what one might do, both as a person who, for example, if you know somebody who is socially isolated or lonely, what you might do, but also from an organizational perspective, what one might do about social isolation and loneliness. And let me just give you some examples here. Some people actually don't know what activities exist. A colleague, a friend of mine here that I'm working with, always says that active living centers, senior centers, are the best kept secret. Now, not everybody is in favor of going to senior centers, for sure, but for some people it's a really good place. But sometimes people don't know that there's just a senior center, a club or a book club just down the street. So we do need to promote activities, what's out there, in a number of ways. Not everybody is tech savvy, so online is great, but that doesn't work for everybody. The radio can be good, newspapers, newsletters, or word of mouth. Feeling uncomfortable joining existing activities, that can be an issue. Sometimes activities, programs are not that inviting to newcomers. So one might have an active living center, but for a new person to walk into that group, into that building even, can be a real challenge. So the question is, how can the place be made more welcoming, so people feel invited, they feel comfortable? And for example, a buddy system might work, that if I know somebody who doesn't want to go there, I might want to take that person along and then introduce that person to other people, so it becomes a comfortable place. As I mentioned, lack of transportation can be a real barrier. If one doesn't drive or can't access a bus, it can be a really isolating experience. So having programs that provide transportation, or taking somebody along, if you know already that you're going somewhere, taking somebody along would be a good idea. Also, again, people are sometimes not aware of what exists out there, so providing that information on activities. Physical health and mobility problems can be, as I mentioned, a problem. So having activities available in a variety of ways, for example, Here and in other cities, there's a Senior Center Without Walls program where people can phone in. So that's designed specifically for socially isolated older adults who are mobility impaired. They can't get out, but they still want to be socially engaged, and they can just pick up the phone and then engage in some type of group activity, whatever that is. Of course, currently with COVID, we have a lot of online activities that are great for some, but not everybody. And then we have psychological factors, mental health problems that require a lot more in-depth attention, for example, by modifying those maladaptive social perceptions, unrealistic expectation, and in some cases require counseling, for example, for people who actually have social phobias or other mental health problems, or have marital problems. One can be lonely in a relationship, so that the spouses need some couple counseling to deal with the loneliness or social isolation. So that's just a few examples, and I will end there and turn it over to Eddy, who will go into more detail about some of the issues that I touched on.
So hello, everyone. I am Eddy. I don't know if people can hear me. So I am with the BC Psychogeriatric Association, and also, as mentioned, a PhD student at VU University Amsterdam. I'm having a bit of, I don't see myself in the corner here. Okay, you can hear me, so that's good. Well, thank you very much to Dave and Verena for the excellent presentations. I'm going to pick up on Verena's last point and focus more on the psychology of isolation and loneliness, and particularly loneliness, given that it's much more subjective than social isolation. So next slide, please. We are wired to connect. Like other animals, we are a fundamentally social species with a basic need to belong and a strong drive for intimacy and companionship. And this drive evolved over millions of years to promote mutual protection and cooperation, which gave our ancestors a significant survival advantage. The need for social connection is so powerful that, as Verena mentioned, people suffer intensely and may even face premature mortality when they are without social connection, either because they're isolated or because they perceive themselves to be isolated, which is what we call loneliness, and which is what I'll focus on. Now, loneliness, just like the need for social connection, also evolved over millions of years. It's a painful, primitive emotion, but it's not just an emotion, it's a warning signal, and it tells us when our social needs are not being met. So it has a very useful function, and it can be due, as mentioned, either to real isolation or the perception of isolation. And as Dave said, loneliness can be defined as a mismatch between the relationships you have and those you want. And when there's a gap, that makes you feel quite disconnected from people, and that can contribute to feeling isolated, even though you may not be objectively isolated. And loneliness prompts us to make changes in our life so that we can reconnect with people. And in this sense, it serves a basic biological purpose like hunger, thirst, and physical pain. Now, in most cases, loneliness is quite temporary because it does what it is meant to do, which is promote social reconnection, as we see in the following diagram, which is a bit complicated, but do bear with me. And we start off with perceived isolation, which, as Verena said, could be due to any number of reasons. But this motivates us in turn to reconnect with people. But before reconnecting, we actually move into a slightly self-protective social withdrawal. So we take a step back from our relationships and consider what may have gone wrong and contributed to isolation and loneliness, and what we might do differently going forward. We also become a little more vigilant for possible social threats like further rejection. Now, in most cases, this vigilance tends to be minor and we get over it. We make the required changes to our behavior. And then in turn, we reconnect with people and our loneliness ends. Now, but for some of us, this cycle sort of goes haywire and we become hypervigilant for social threat. And in turn, we tend to behave in a way that pushes people away rather than draws them in. And of course, people react negatively to this, which in turn makes us feel bad about ourselves and other people, makes us withdraw even further, and then feel lonely, and the cycle sort of goes on and can be very difficult to escape. And this cycle is very, very stressful. And I think this is one of the reasons, like, it has a real negative impact on our physiology, and is one of the reasons why we see so many health problems associated with chronic loneliness in particular, and also with sleep problems. When you're in a constant state of hypervigilance for social threat, it's almost like you're always sleeping with one eye open, is a metaphor that I've heard. Now, why does this happen to some people? Now, one of the obvious reasons is just social isolation that doesn't end, like many of us experienced during COVID lockdown. We wanted to reconnect, but we couldn't, so we just sort of retreated into our own self-protective cocoons. That's why I really wasn't surprised to hear a lot of news stories about people saying that they felt very socially anxious once lockdown lifted and they had the opportunity to reconnect. They were just anxious to do it, and not just because they were afraid of contracting COVID. Now, some people may be so chronically isolated that they actually lose the motivation to reconnect altogether, even when opportunities for social connection present themselves. And we call this learned helplessness. And I like the example of the elephant who's been tied down for so long and no longer tries to escape, even when he's able to escape. Personality traits like neuroticism and rejection sensitivity make some people more prone to hypervigilance and social threats. And intriguingly, loneliness also has a very strong genetic component, including influences on prosocial behavior, attention processing, and sensitivity to negative social information. And we also know that people with low self-worth may be less motivated to seek new relationships once their existing ones dissolve or are of lower quality. Next line, please. And also having an external locus of control. So feeling that your life and your relationships in particular are not within your control. And I mentioned genetic influences. Also, depression and hostility due to chronic isolation and loneliness can lead to a lack of motivation to reconnect and just put us in a bad mood and behave in a way that's aversive towards other people, which prolongs the cycle. And finally, a history of being a member of a marginalized group can increase the risk of chronic loneliness, as we see, for example, in LGBTQ older adults. Many are isolated and lonely compared to their heterosexual peers. And one of the reasons is demographic factors. They're more likely to be single and childless, to be estranged from their families of origin, and to have a smaller pool of potential partners from which to choose. Many older LGBTQ adults also lost a large part of their social longtime friends through the AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s. And many continue to struggle with minority stress, which is the negative consequences of growing up with a stigmatized identity. And this includes victimization, real and perceived, and anticipated, internalized homophobia, concealing your sexual orientation, rejection sensitivity, and all of these we can imagine have a negative impact on our ability to meet people and relate with them. And all of this, in terms of the cycle of loneliness, we know that minority stress factors like rejection sensitivity can make it easier to become lonely in the first place, but can also exacerbate the cycle of loneliness. And all of this creates stress, which adds to the health burden already experienced by older LGBTQ adults. Another group that tends to be marginalized and increased risk for isolation and loneliness is older offenders, partly or largely due to conditions of confinement. They have little social contact with friends or relatives or even other inmates. And prison is a total institution where all aspects of an inmate's life are controlled by others. And this can lead to a sort of institutional dependency and passivity, including social withdrawal. Now, for various reasons, older offenders are more likely to get stuck in the cycle of loneliness. One of the reasons is suspiciousness of others, which is not uncommon in a prison setting. And another is the stigma of being an offender. Once released, an offender may be trying to turn his life around, but he goes out and tells other people about his history, and they sort of shun him, which increases feelings of isolation. For offenders, being stuck in this cycle, as mentioned, can lead to passivity, also self-focus, lack of empathy, aggressive behavior, recidivism, and even self-sabotage. So how do we get unstuck once we're in this cycle? As Verena mentioned, it's important to figure out why we're socially isolated or lonely. I really like this quote from Einstein, who says, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and only 5 minutes thinking about solutions. As mentioned, there can be several reasons why we're isolated and lonely. And if we figure those out, we can create an action plan to address them and perhaps seek assistance if necessary. Now, one of the approaches that I like is called EASE, and this is developed by John Cacioppo, who's a leading loneliness researcher who's now passed. And he recognized that when people are chronically lonely, it's really hard for them to get back into social life because they're very anxious. So he recommended that we extend ourselves slowly by having small social interactions in safe places. So this could be something as simple as saying hello to the grocery store clerk. The idea is not to have a long conversation or make a new friend, but just to have a positive social interaction to sort of change how you perceive people and realize that people aren't scary. Asking for or offering help is a great way to start these interactions, as is using little props like reading a book in a public space or having a camera. That's often a conversation starter. And what we call purposeful loitering, so just sitting in a spot where you're more likely to run into different people. Having an action plan with sustained, meaningful activities is really crucial, and enjoyable activities that will force you to go back to the same setting and interact with people. But often when we're starting a new activity and we're very lonely, we expect to make new friends right away, but we forget that it takes time for relationships to develop. If you have activities that are really enticing to you, you're going to come back to that social setting over and over and hope, because the activity is exciting in its own right, and then therefore be more likely to actually start a relationship with somebody. Being selective, looking for the right people in the right places, not just seeking anybody, but finding people that you actually have something in common with. And finally, expecting the best, remembering what loneliness does to social perceptions, and trying not to expect too much from people too soon. Improving existing relationships may often be easier than trying to start new ones. So one of the things I've recommended to people is to do like an inventory of the people they have in their life and try to reconnect with those people. And people are often surprised when they do this inventory. They say, oh, I didn't really realize how many people I actually had in my life, but I just sort of stopped talking to. So during COVID lockdown, this is an ideal opportunity to reconnect with those people. One way to reconnect is to take risks by being a little more open and honest and vulnerable with people and share a bit of yourself, because when you do that, other people do that too, and it creates a sense of intimacy. Aim for a diverse mix of people, particularly with age range. Have younger and older friends so that you're not, as an older adult, totally reliant on older people who may not be able, who have health problems and may not be able to provide all the support that you need. Resisting the tendency to compare your relationships with others. And most importantly, focusing on the quality rather than the quantity of your relationships. And again, seeking counseling if you need assistance with your relationships. Now, as Verena mentioned, unrealistic expectations are quite an issue. Here are some examples that I hear a lot of. I need the perfect partner. My partner should be my best friend. True friends should never make me feel bad. People who care about me should always know what I'm thinking, and my family should always be there for me. Well, these are all very nice thoughts. They inevitably lead to disappointment and loneliness. So we should really examine those standards that we have. Questioning our perceptions and beliefs. We know how loneliness affects how we think. So when we think that nobody likes us, we should ask ourselves, is this true? How do we know? If someone's not talking to me, is it because they're ignoring me and they're angry with me? Or is it just because they're having a bad day or thinking about something? And also looking at maladaptive beliefs like relationships just happen and that they're not in my control and that it's impossible to make friends when you're older. These can be very self-handicapping beliefs. Cultivating positive emotions. Chronic loneliness and isolation make us feel depressed, which of course makes it harder to be social. So we should change this by paying more attention to the positive aspects of social interactions and maybe writing them down in a journal. Reminiscing about past relationships, the good ones, not the bad ones, can lift our mood and also remind us that there are or there have been people who care about us and that we're not unlovable. And then also lifting your mood in other ways if you can't alleviate isolation or loneliness right away. So just being active, having novel experiences, engaging in flow activities, something you love so much that you lose all track of time and forget about your loneliness. Exercise and sleep. We know that isolation and loneliness increase the risk for poor sleep, but isolation and loneliness also increase the risk, that poor sleep increases the risk for isolation and loneliness. For obvious reasons, we're cranky when we're not well rested, and also the frontal lobes of our brain are not that active, and they are responsible for controlling our emotions and our thoughts about other people. In the next slide, admitting loneliness and isolation. Loneliness in particular tends to be highly stigmatized, and we don't talk about it. It's very embarrassing. If you don't talk about something or admit it, you can't change it. Not running from loneliness, accepting it and trying to understand what it's trying to tell you, and tolerating loneliness. Can you enjoy your own company? Can you meet your own needs? Can you soothe yourself? Can you give yourself advice like you would give to a friend? Can you be there for yourself rather than always relying on somebody else to meet your emotional needs? Mindfulness meditation is also quite helpful, as is, again, minimizing the impact, the negative impact of isolation or loneliness by eating well, relaxation, exercise, and sleep. And I keep harping on sleep, which I think is the most important thing. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't say something about social media. There's an ongoing debate about whether social media makes us more lonely. My view is that social media is a tool like anything else, and it's good or bad depending on how you use it. And we know from the research that people who use social media in an active way, so to meet other people or to stay in touch with people, that leads to less loneliness over time. Using it in a passive way, such as just looking at people's pictures on Facebook and scrolling and clicking like, these things can actually increase feelings of loneliness because we're looking at all these pictures that people have carefully curated about their wonderful, happy lives. And we're looking, and the pictures are all of these parties that people are going to that you haven't been invited to. This can be really depressing and make you feel even more rejected. And unfortunately, we know that chronically lonely people do tend to use social media in a passive manner, which mirrors the way that they actually conduct their relationships in everyday life as well. So on the next slide, I have some suggested books that people could read if they're interested in the topics I've discussed. You can find other suggested readings on my website, seniorsloneliness.ca, and you can also find my loneliness report. It's incredibly long and boring, but full of a lot of interesting references. And you're welcome to contact me at any time if you would like more information about what I talked about. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Eddy, Verena, and Dave for your very informative and thought-provoking presentations. Now let's move on to the Q&A sessions. I see there's been some questions coming through. So first, a quick reminder on how to ask your questions. Use the Q&A function that's located at the bottom of your screen and type in your question, but don't forget to let us know which panelist that you're posing the question to, Dave, Verena, or Eddy. And we'll get to as many questions as we can in the time that's allotted. So let's take a look here at our first question. This one is for either Dave or Verena. Why are older adults lumped together? There is a big difference between those 65 to 75 and those 85 and older. Can you speak to the difference in loneliness and social isolation within the 65 plus age group?
You want to start, Verena, or would you like me to start? I could start. Some of that is limitations of sampling when you're doing public surveys, is getting a statistically representative group within those different age deciles. So we tend to stop at 65 plus and look at people just in retirement age. Verena might have some more insights into that, because obviously there are circumstances once you get to those age groups that will really impact the value of your relationships, you know, whether or not your partner is still with you, whether you have children who are still involved in your life. So I will pass it over and see if there's any insight there, but from our perspective, simply just kind of some sampling limitations in terms of being able to get enough people from 85 to 95, for example, as a smaller portion of the population.
From my perspective, yes, it's a very, very good question. And in fact, in my research, we have looked at the 65 plus group and separated out this. Usually I've done the 65 to 74, 75 plus. And again, that relates only to sample issues. So they're not having not enough people in the groups. In terms of social isolation and loneliness, what I've seen in our data, and that's the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging, which is the age range there is from 45 to 85 at baseline, and then people are followed up over time, that social isolation and loneliness increase with age. So the proportion of lonely and socially isolated increases as you get older into those very old age groups. And that intuitively makes sense when you think about what Dave talked about, what social isolation is. Often friends are lost, you have a spouse who dies, so people's networks shrink, and then that can lead to social isolation. Of course, doesn't always lead to that, but can. So I think it is very important to look at different age groups to the extent we can, and often, unfortunately, we're limited by the sample size, as Dave was saying.
Great, thank you, Dave and Verena. Dave, here's another one for you. Are some technologies better than others for addressing social isolation? Are some better for addressing loneliness?
I would say that the ones that we measured in terms of technologies that people use, things like email and instant messaging, not particularly effective. You get more satisfaction just in terms of the connection as you go into things like messaging on cell phones and calling people. We did see the most positive response with things like this, with something where you could actually see the person's face. 75% of people who use a video app say that they find that it's actually a rewarding experience. That drops to about 55% for people who are just using cell phones and just kind of texting and calling each other. So a lot of it also is what you do with that. So, this is post-pandemic, but if you're using those things to organize events and to go out and see people, there's such a value in actual physical contact and going out to community events or being around people and trying to kind of grow your network, which a lot of people stop doing at certain times in their life. You've got these ebbs and flows of life, and sometimes I think these technologies, it depends on how you use them. And certainly right now we're seeing that video calling, like we didn't even have the word Zoom in the survey last year. It was just Facebook Messenger or these other different types. So we had to add Zoom because this is kind of taken over the globe now. And that really seems to be the biggest type of connection, because then you can see, I've got friends, you probably have friends and family who are seeing grandchildren that have been born over Zoom for the first time. And these are very important connections right now. And I think being able to actually be face-to-face and see facial expressions and the value of that is kind of really does lend itself to a better feeling of connection, even though it's not perfect.
If I could pick up on that just a bit, I think it's also important for people who are not very computer literate to have access to classes or lessons or tutorials where they can learn to become more comfortable with technology. And there have been some excellent programs run by libraries, for example. There's one great program in New York where they actually offered to give people a free tablet in exchange for using it to make new social connections or to remain connected with people in their life that maybe they've sort of stopped talking to. And a lot of older adults really like that. And it really is a myth. I hear it a lot that older people don't use social media. They do. And certainly baby boomers, and I think they will continue to use social media. And for those who are technologically not very adept, I think it's important to have access to lessons. And also information on how to be on the internet in a safe manner, so as not to fall prey to fraud, for example.
Thank you, Eddy. And I know it certainly made a big difference from the Eldercare Foundation when we were able to get technology into the long-term care facilities, and families were able to have those Zoom calls with their loved ones all over the world. And it really did bring those connections back. And it was especially for end of life. It's so important. And I just have a little quick one. My son had his first baby boy on March 14th. My mom's 92 years old, and I taught her how to use FaceTime over the phone so that she could actually FaceTime with my son and her new great-grandson, which was very cool. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits of technology. Verena, here's one for you. Loneliness seems to be a big factor for depression and anxiety. Can you expand on some of the things one can do to increase their psychological well-being, particularly if they are not very socially oriented?
I think that's such a good way of putting it. Not everybody is a social butterfly, and we're not all there out there and want to go and be around people. And it's definitely not one size fits all. I come down to a couple of things. One is meaningful activity. What is meaningful for the person? And that may be a group context, but it may not be. It may be just once in a while touching base or having one person to do something with. And then figuring out what is meaningful to a person. And listening to the person, what it is they want. So not assuming that the solution is to get the person into a big group. I mean, I need to give it a specific example, and the best one I have, just as I'm thinking on the fly here, is my father, who was not a social butterfly. You could not have put him into a group setting easily, but he really, really liked, in the nursing home he was in, he liked a discussion group they started with about 3 men, and they would talk about politics and current issues. That was for him. But that's something meaningful. It's a meaningful activity for him, and to find out what was meaningful for him and not to force it. So it's going to be individual. Listening, I think, to the person. So if somebody has somebody like my dad in the, who was lonely at times in the nursing home, listening and figuring out what was good for him.
That's good advice. Eddy, here's one for you. We can expect to lose friends and family members as we grow older. It's hard to consider building new relationships among members of one's peer group, particularly if you were not someone that was socially active most of your life. Do you have suggestions for one can address this even when one is not an outgoing individual?
Well, I think this is quite similar to the previous question. And certainly one thing I would recommend is again, going back to that ease approach and just sort of dipping your toes into social life a little bit and trying to become a little more comfortable with people rather than just immersing yourself into a new group, which can be quite overwhelming. And one of the things I also encourage people to do is what I call sort of like semi-social activities. So a lot of activities at senior centers involve people just socializing for its own sake, but a lot of people don't like that. But they do still want to be a little connected with people. So there are activities people can do that are kind of solitary, but that they're doing next to other people. So one example I like is something, Men's Sheds is a program from Australia. I'm sure people have heard about that. So it's basically these workshops and automotive shops where men get together and they build things. They fix cars, they make furniture, but it's a great way to interact socially, but in the way that men often do, which is sort of just doing something rather than actually talking to each other directly. So they're getting that social connection, but it doesn't feel like it's forced. And they can, come and go as they wish. They can focus on their activity when they don't want to talk, and then they can take a break and talk to the person next to them if they want some social connection. So there are things people can do that are not, totally for extroverted people.
Here's one for you, Verena. Could you describe the Without Walls program in more detail?
Yes, for sure. It's called the Senior Center Without Walls program. In Winnipeg here, it's run through A&O Support Services for Older Adults, because they recognized that there was a need for people who were socially isolated but were homebound, for example, had mobility problems, could not go out and participate in activities, and so were very, very isolated. Some of these people are also in rural areas. And so building on a program from the US, they introduced this, was the first one in Canada, in fact, this program. And what it is people call in at certain times And there's a program on all kinds of things. It might be around traveling, it might be opera, it might be about Celtic dance, whatever. And then there's a moderator, and the participants are on the phone, and they can talk to each other. Of course, there's always a little chatting, and they learn, and they are socially engaged. It is the numbers, I can tell you, have increased during COVID as people are more isolated and have found that that program at least gives them some connection. So it's been replicated in many countries too, but also many cities across Canada as being just a useful alternative to in-person contact for those who are socially isolated. It's free. Here it's free, so it's, that's good, of course, for those who are on low income. As long as you have a phone, you can participate. Which, by the way, just to add, and we've just heard this, this has been a particularly issue now with COVID. There are some people who have no phones. Not only are they not have computers and internet, but they don't even have phones. So now we're getting into the most vulnerable. And with COVID, they're now extremely isolated. And so that's a real concern.
Definitely, definitely. Eddy, here's one for you. Please comment on the role of churches or faith groups in addressing social isolation and loneliness. What about the role of spirituality generally, separate from churches or faith groups?
Well, I'm not a very religious or spiritual person, but I will take a stab at this. I did mention in one, I had churches and spirituality in one of my slides, but I had to take it out. I didn't have time to talk about them. But certainly in the research, I have noticed that a lot of people say that they turn to their faith and to spirituality to help them cope with isolation and loneliness. So for a lot of people, if they believe in God, that's somebody, a being that they can feel a connection to, and they find that very comforting. A lot of people like to go to church, not just for its religious element, but also just for the social aspect. And I think churches are a wonderful place to go because it's something you go to on a regular basis. And you're also, churches are doing a lot of work right now on the ground and trying different programming to help people that they think are socially isolated and lonely in their congregation connect with others. And they are often the ones that are seeing seniors that nobody else is seeing. So they're in a really good position to connect people and to reach out to them. I've noticed a lot of LGBT older adults, even though they've had negative experiences with churches in the past for obvious reasons, have now become more comfortable with church, and a lot of them attend church on a regular basis precisely for the social element, whether or not they are religious. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for churches to play a role with isolation and loneliness, and people to just draw on their spirituality and their religion to cope with isolation or loneliness if they can't alleviate it in other ways.
Yeah, I will jump in here too and say that I didn't include this in my presentation. It is part of the article that we wrote online. There is actually a positive correlation between being involved in a church community and being less isolated. It seems kind of obvious because you have a built-in community. If you're somebody who attends religious services regularly, it's a very social activity. There's often very strong relationships there. And if you look at just people who regularly attend religious services, so we're not talking about weddings or funerals, but other types of services, they're twice as likely to be non-isolated. So I guess half as likely to be isolated compared to the group that is very isolated. They're much less likely to be involved in that type of activity. So there is actually quite a positive correlation, particularly in terms of isolation, not as much in terms of loneliness, which is an interesting kind of quirk of the data. But certainly people who have that built-in community and that rely on faith-based communities are significantly less likely to be isolated. So that is an important aspect. And thank you for that question.
Here's a comment for you, Dave. It says, I learned how to FaceTime so I can chat with our son who lives in Europe. It's great.
Yeah,
and I don't know who this one's directed at, but it's possibly you, Dave. Could you talk about the impact of advertising For example, keeping young, reducing wrinkles, on one's view of aging, which may actually affect one's view on the value in their society, maybe even leading to increased social isolation.
Yeah, I certainly don't have anything specifically on that in the presentation, but I think that's a good point, is that that is another feeling of marginalization that I think that older people feel, and something that, you know, I'm not unable to quantify it, but could put some kind of negative pressure on people from going out and really expressing themselves as they would be normally comfortable doing so. I think there is that trend in our society as we've kind of moved, leaning back on my data, away from community. We've also kind of, in some ways, devalued the value of age and the wisdom of age compared to previous iterations of our society. So that's a really interesting trend, and nothing specifically in my data for you, but I think that's a good point to make also, is that how we value people in society really has an impact on how we connect in society. So those things are interconnected.
Can I just add on to this, the ageism and how it relates to a number of things. And one of the things that ageism, so negative attitudes, stereotypes about what an older person is like and how it can impact what activities they do. So senior centers, well, they're no longer often called senior centers. That senior center without walls, interestingly, still has that label. I don't want to be a senior. I'm not one of those old people who do those old things. When actually you look at active living centers for older adults, they have a lot of fun activities. Or maybe it's because I am older, you know, but you know, some of it seems pretty fun to me. Some things I wouldn't want to do. So it becomes kind of unfortunately, the stereotypes can really prevent people from trying out different things that might actually be very much fun. The other thing, comment around ageism, again, that feeling, I don't want to look old, also sometimes prevents people from using certain helps. So for example, you don't want to, I don't want to use that cane. I don't want to look old. And therefore I can't, you know, there's a danger then to losing balance. Oh no, I don't need a hearing aid. I am not old. Yet it would help with communication. So those stereotypes, that ageism that is in society gets internalized and unfortunately prevents sometimes people from doing the things that would actually be quite fun if they were only to try them out.
On physical appearance, I should note, in my research, I've collected a lot of data on the role of physical appearance, and I'm looking at the relationship with the tendency to feel lonely. And I do note that there is a long history of ageism and a lot of focus on physical attractiveness and youthfulness in particular in the LGBT community, particularly for men. And as men age, they do find that they feel marginalized, particularly by other younger people. And that can have an impact on their self-esteem and their comfort in entering different venues, many of which are quite youth-oriented. And there are many instances of younger men making fun of older men for going in those venues and outwardly making fun of people's appearance, which can be really devastating for people who already have a long history of having been rejected by society, heterosexual society, but to then experience it from people within their own community is doubly devastating for that population.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, here's one for everyone. So feel free to wrangle for the first one to answer. Could you comment on the potential value of intergenerational programs on decreasing social isolation and loneliness? What about similar types of programs for individuals who may be physically, cognitively, emotionally, or psychologically challenged?
Oh, I'll jump in. I am a huge fan of intergenerational programs. I think it is so important. It's not for everybody, but for those who love being with kids and mingling the two, it is great. And I was just watching or talking to people about some program that they had in a community, elder dance, where they pair high school kids with older people and they learn how to dance together. And I saw a video on that and I thought, this looks like fun. I want to do that. Anyway, I think there's such a both sides can benefit. So a lot of young people don't have their grandparents close by, so lose touch with older people. And then on of course, the other side as well, some kids can't be there. And I think the mix is really wonderful. Having said that, it's never one size fits all. Some people don't want to have anything to do. I had an aunt who hated having a daycare close by to her senior apartment. But, you know, again, it's an individual thing, but generally, I think it's wonderful.
In the context of marginalized groups, I was just reading about a wonderful program that just started in one of the prisons in the US, I forget the name, but it's an intergenerational program where they're training younger offenders to become licensed practical nurses. So they give them the education and they give them a credential that they can use when they leave prison. And they are taught, and they learn how to take care of the older offenders in the prison, many of whom have very complex health needs that general prison staff is unable to handle. So it's a wonderful example. People in the program right now really like it, and it's a win-win for both generations.
Dave, did you have any comments that you wanted to jump in on that one with?
Not really, just that I think that is valuable, particularly for people who have physical impairments, mobility challenges. We uncovered in our study as well a pretty significant trend toward people who deal with physical disability being significantly more likely to be either socially isolated, lonely, or both, compared to the people that do not have any sort of impairment. And even people who just have a mobility challenge or a visual or an auditory challenge are also quite a bit more likely. So these are really important considerations when program building and when trying to outreach to people. There are populations that are kind of underserved and a little bit more prone to these types of phenomena that we're talking about.
Thank you. Here's one that it would be great if you all wanted to chime in on it as well. What are different cities doing to address social isolation and loneliness?
Well, I'll chime in on that one. I expected that question, and I had a list. Here in Vancouver, we're doing something that I think is wonderful. There was a pilot program a few years ago called Hey Neighbor, and I talk about it in my report. And basically, the city identified a few apartment buildings in the city, and they actually paid tenants in those buildings to be social concierges or social conveners who organized social activities in the building and got people together, recognizing that there's so much focus now on improving social connections by encouraging older adults to leave their home, go to a senior center, but not everybody can do that. And even if they can, some people don't want to for various reasons. And so it's important to actually make their own home environment a little more social and bring services to them. And I think this is a great pilot, and some other groups are now trying to expand that. And I think this builds naturally on what's called NORCs, naturally occurring retirement communities. You have large groups of people in a neighborhood who decide to live there and age in place rather than going into a residential care facility. I also really like, in Hamilton, there's a program called Home Paramedic Service, and it's basically paramedics will visit low-income apartment buildings and provide blood pressure checks and things like that. But it's a wonderful way for tenants who might not be very social and might not want to leave their apartment and talk to other people to come downstairs and get their blood pressure checked, and then just sort of casually interact with other tenants, because a lot of people may feel very isolated or lonely, but they're embarrassed. They don't want to look like they have no friends. And so they won't go to a party, but they will go to some kind of event where the focus is not actually on social interaction. So they'll happily go and get their blood pressure or go downstairs to chat with other people under the pretext of getting their blood pressure checked. So I think I love these kinds of programs. And we also have postal carriers in different European cities who actually visit isolated seniors and try to connect them with services. And in the Netherlands, I think they have a program where they actually provide weekly home visits to seniors for a small fee. So there's all sorts of things that cities are doing that are quite innovative. And one other one that I should mention, sorry, is in the UK, many cities are using the fire department to connect with seniors in the context of doing a home safety check. So they'll go in and they'll help a senior identify potential fire hazards. And we know that many fire hazards are also barriers for leaving a house and being socially connected. In the course of having those conversations, it's a great way to assess whether somebody's isolated or lonely, and then start a conversation about connecting them to services if needed. And people just like talking to firefighters.
I do. Verena, did you have anything to add on some of the things that you might be doing in Winnipeg or otherwise?
Well, you know, there's so much going on, and the more I learn about what's out there, the more impressed I am. I mean, we have so much going for various interests, and some of what Eddy was mentioning, safety checks. Of course, I mentioned Senior Center Without Walls. That's for specific groups, but a lot of informal activities that people could do. There's all kinds of walking clubs and connections and book clubs, what have you. So there's pretty much anything for anybody. Just given the context of this webinar, I'd also wanted to mention, though, the volunteering, which is another big aspect. So it's a meaningful activity. It's usually an activity with other people. It's social, right? It's got everything going. Plus, it's physical. Often, from what you were describing from some of the volunteers, you've got the whole package of benefits. You've got the physical activity, social activity, the mental activity. You've got the meaningful activity, having a purpose in life. So I think volunteering, and they're in everywhere. You have that around the world. People can volunteer. So I think that's a really important thing to keep going as long as one can, and encourage people to be able to volunteer.
If I could add to that, one really important thing is a lot of people who are older adults who are isolated or lonely, they often say they would never actually, did I lose my screen? They would never actually, I don't know if I've lost my screen here.
We can still see you.
Oh, good. They would never actually go to a program that's advertised for people who are isolated or lonely, but they do say they would be very happy to volunteer and to help other people who are isolated and lonely. And so that takes attention away from their own problems. It reduces their own feelings of isolation and loneliness and lets them help other people at the same time. So older adults, they like to be part of something rather than having people do things for them.
And that's a great point, Eddy. And we actually had a group that we ran, and it was about social isolation and loneliness, and they chose to create a tip sheet about, they called it Shy Seniors, about how to make new friends and how to conduct yourself and how to listen and participate. And it was really interesting that they associated it as being shy. So I guess people look at things differently. Well, we're just about out of time. So Dave, unless you have something to chime in on that. Did you?
Nope, no, I'm happy to defer on that.
Okay, well, we do have some more great questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. So I would just like to say thank you very much to Dave and Verena and Eddy today for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. I certainly know from my point of view that the insights that were shared today will be invaluable in both my personal life and my work life. And I think one of the things that I really learned was we all need to take that time to support and care for one another, no matter what age. And not only through this isolating and lonely pandemic, but always, because communities really thrive when we all feel that sense of belonging and value. So thank you to our three fantastic panelists for all that excellent information. I would also like to say congratulations once again to our VERA recipients for all of their contributions. Our communities could not function without volunteers. And thank you, Verena, for bringing that up and closing that out in that final question. And then I'd like to give a special shout out to our organizing and technical team from the Institute on Aging and Lifelong Health for overseeing this year's event and making sure that everything ran smoothly for today's presentation. I think it all went very well. Thank you, Leah, Joanne, Ashley, Sasha, and Arlene. So on behalf of the Eldercare Foundation and the University of Victoria's Institute on Aging and Lifelong Health, thank you to all of you in our audience today for attending our first virtual Vera Celebration and International Day of Older Persons lecture. I hope that you all learned something today that will benefit you or someone in your life. And there's resources included on the exit slide that you'll see in a moment, links to the organizations and to the recording of today's session, which of course will be available on both the Eldercare and the Institute's websites. So thank you very much again and have a great rest of your day. Happy International Day of the Older Persons.